Okay, well, welcome back everybody. I hope you all had the chance to just have a quick leg stretch, and we're pretty much on time. So I'm going to hand over now to Dominic Cortizo, Eric Lucas and Jeff Phipps, who are both from Transport Canada, to talk about the arrangements that we've put in place between the UK and Canada that replace our arrangements we've had with under the ARSA system for some years. Thank you.
So welcome back everybody. You might notice my little bit of headgear here. This is in honor to our friends in Canada. This is the hat for the Winnipeg Jets, my favorite ice hockey team. So I doff my hat to Eric Lucas, who's joining us today. He's the manager for international arrangements in the standards branch of TCCA, and also his colleague Jeff Phipps, who is the chief for operational airworthiness. So can we begin the presentation, please? First slide, thank you. Eric will introduce himself a little later when I hand over to him during the presentation. So next slide, please. So we're here similarly to the presentation you just had from Mark and Mazdak to provide you with an overview of the new TIP between Transport Canada and CAA, to provide you an outline of certification staff with an explanation of what's changed, what has changed between Transport Canada and the ARSA's TIP, and also to provide you with an explanation on the subtleties that may arise during the initial phase of implementation. Next slide, please. So we will not go through a huge overview of the TIP, but we will run through the base of the authority that we have in place, the regulatory framework for Transport Canada and their organisational structure, the scope of privileges that will be provided by the TIP, and the application process that you will need to follow to get a Transport Canada design approval. We won't have questions at the end of this presentation. We'll carry those on until the end of the presentation with ANAC. Next slide, please. So we have a working arrangement between ourselves and Transport Canada, similar to the one in place between them and the ARSA. Next one, please. And here we have the TIP, but these will be available. I think they're already available on the CA website and also the TCA website. Next slide, please. So the TIP is the extension of the working arrangement that's been signed between the CAA and Transport Canada, and it resembles very much the format and structure of that between Transport Canada and the ARSA, which has been used as the basis for this one that we've put together. So we have references to the certificating authority and the validating authority, whereas in the EASA TCCA TIP, it refers to exporting party and importing party respectively. So that's actually probably the main difference between the two. Similar scope of privileges are covered within the TCA and the EASA TIP as we have with our one with them. And we recognise prior design approvals that were certified or validated by TCA and EASA under the existing TCA and EASA TIP before our exit from the EU, so in other words, by the end of the year. And the application to Transport Canada, as you would expect, is identical to that that's already in place in the TCCA and EASA TIP. So not much has changed. Okay, so I'll now hand over to Eric, who will run you through the regulatory framework for Transport Canada.
Thank you, Dominic. Good one. Okay, I guess I was muted. So thank you, Dominic. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this segment of the webinar that talks about the Transport Canada UK CAA procedures. So as Dominic has mentioned, our procedures with the UK CAA pretty much mirrors what we have with the EASA. So from a procedural standpoint, I would assume there's a certain familiarity. So over the next few slides, what I'd like to do is show you our regulatory framework and organizational arrangement, because we haven't really dealt with each other directly. And so we'd like to take the time to show you where we're coming from in terms of our procedures. So our regulatory framework starts with the Aeronautics Act, which is a legislation in Parliament, and that is really the authority that governs everything aeronautics in Canada. It is also the Aeronautics Act that allows us to enter into a bilateral arrangement with another state or another foreign authority. So the working arrangement was executed under that authority. And the second layer of our regulatory framework is the Canadian Aviation Regulations, or CAR. And regulations basically just articulate the different areas of civil aviation that we regulate. Next slide, please. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So the Canadian aviation regulations have 10 parts, but the most relevant part that pertains to our arrangement is part 5, which is airworthiness. And under part 5, there are 9 subparts. And CAR 521 is specifically the regulations that deal with approval of type design and design changes. And CAR 521 also includes with our regulatory framework is that we have a separate regulation that deals with production. And that is covered under a different regulation as 561 and also export airworthiness. So our CAR 521 is homogeneous in the sense it only deals with design approvals. Next slide, please. Can I have the next slide, please? So CAR 521 is equivalent to IR 21, FAR 21, or the UKCAA Part 21. Essentially, 521 stipulates everything that we need to conduct in order to grant an approval. So first off, CAR 521 for either a domestic applicant or a foreign applicant, our 521 has an eligibility requirement, and that requirement is simply that the applicant must have a technical capability or have access to a technical capability. So in the case of DOAs with EASA or a DOA in the UK, that serves as evidence that the applicant or the holder has technical capability. Again, 521 is the rule regulation that establishes the certification basis for design approvals for both domestic and foreign application. It defines the time limits by which each application is going to be processed. Now, obviously, for foreign applications, there is no time limit, but we do have a service standard by which we have to respond. 521 also references what airworthiness standards are applicable and also the environmental standards that are applicable. Now, two of the most important elements of our 521 is the piece about continuing airworthiness, which is a requirement for us to be able to fulfill our obligations as a state of design under Annex 8. So under 521, once you hold the Transport Canada design approval, you have some responsibilities assigned to you under Division 8. And also part of that is the service difficulty reporting requirement, which is an integral part if we are to uphold our continuing airworthiness responsibilities under ICAO. Now, I did mention earlier that the Aeronautics Act allows us to enter into bilateral procedures with another foreign authority. So we have a specific division in CAR 521 that allows us to sort of fulfill some of the requirements that are applicable to an applicant who we may not have a bilateral agreement. So Division 11, where it says, where it's circled right there, the validation of foreign products allows us to fulfill all of the requirements of our 521 that would have applied to a domestic holder, to fulfill those requirements in accordance with whatever agreement we have agreed to with our bilateral partner. So Division 11 is very key, and that is where our technical implementation procedures with the UK CAA falls into. Next slide, please. Okay. You may not be familiar with the different offices across Transport Canada that conduct aircraft certification offices. Essentially, we have 6 offices in Transport Canada that have an aircraft certification capability. The headquarters is situated in Ottawa, and headquarters deal with all applications for initial type certificates for aircraft engine and propeller, but also headquarters in Ottawa deal with amendments to those type certificates. In addition to Ottawa, we also have 5 regional offices, and they are capable of conducting validation activities for STCs, and for domestic applicants, they're also responsible for granting TSOs, parts design approval, and repair design approvals. So incoming validations are typically submitted through the Ottawa office, and then the Ottawa office would manage that according to the region that will be handling the application. Typically, where a Canadian customer's place of business is located, the lead region for conducting the validation activity will be that regional office that has geographical jurisdiction. But it's also typical that other regions may be helping in, because we do have a resource sharing arrangement and a work leveling arrangement with the regions. So essentially, any validation from the UK CAA go through Ottawa, but further down the road, as the activity continues, you may actually be coordinating or dealing with the different regional offices across Canada. Next slide, please. Now, the National Aircraft Certification Branch in Ottawa is actually the sole office that handles all type certification and validation. There are a lot more divisions in that organization, but I'm not showing it here because it won't fit in the slide. So what I have on the screen are the different offices that you may be dealing with when it comes to validation of design approvals. So we do have the Chief of Engineering, the Chief of Continuing Airworthiness. As I mentioned, 521 attaches responsibilities to any holder of a Canadian design approval document. We have the Chief of Project Management, which is actually central to receiving all validation applications. And then we have the Chief of Flight Test. On the left side of the slide is the Chief of Regional Engineering, wherein all the regional offices report to. Each regional office has a regional manager, and it's a full engineering capability for each region. We have one region, which is the Prairie and Northern region, given the geographical size of their oversight, that we actually have 3 office locations in Edmonton, Calgary, and Winnipeg. So this is just a snapshot of the relevant organization that you may be dealing with when it comes to the validation of design approvals from the UK CAA. I think that pretty much sums up the presentation of our framework on organizational structure. I'm sure over the next several weeks and months to come, there will be more questions with regard to each other's internal proceedings and policies and procedures, as we now have to deal directly with each other as opposed to going through EASA. And we would welcome the opportunity to respond to those questions. I thank you, and yield back to Dominic.
Thank you very much, Eric, for providing that clarity about the way that TCCA is organised. So I'm just going to run through an overview of the differences, if you like, between the EASA and the UK TIPS with TCCA. So first of all, with respect to apply for type certificates, there is no change. An application for TC can be submitted for aircraft, blah, 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 engines and propellers. in the usual way that you would do under the existing arrangements. The next slide, please. So you might notice a bit of a theme here that with respect to how we will manage the approval or validation of major design changes by TC or STC holders, there is again nothing changed between the TCCA and the EASA tip. Everything remains the same. Design changes will be classified as level 1 major, level 2 major or minor as at present. And I would refer you back to Mark's table that he put together where he compared the different tips and IPAs between our friendly authorities. And you'll see that that is a useful ready reckoner. And I would recommend that you have a copy of that to hand when you're working on validations with the various partners. Next slide, please. So again, major changes coming from anybody other than the TC holder, there is no change. Initial STCs will require submission of an application in a normal way, and subsequent changes to the STC will again be classified as level 1 major, level 2 major, or again minor. Next slide, please. Again, in terms of repair design approvals, privileges remain unchanged. There's automatic reciprocal acceptance of repair designs, except where the repair design approval is for a critical or life-limited part developed by a person other than the holder of the actual approval. So again, that is no different to what is currently in place between Transport Canada and EASA. Next slide. Thank you. TSOs. So privileges remain unchanged. There will not be a common TSO list between UKCA and TCCA. Approvals granted by the CAA under Part 21A subpart O will be considered automatically accepted by TCCA, and approvals granted in a similar way under the Canadian system will also be automatically accepted by CAA. The only exception being that for TSOs for APUs, where an application will be required for approval in accordance with the tip. Next slide, please. So for replacement parts, again, nothing has changed. Automatic acceptance without the need for application, provided that the replacement part does not meet either of those criteria. Next slide, please. So TCCA have application forms like everybody else do. So for TCs, there's form 260756, and for STCs, the form 0469. And those of you that have already in the past applied for these approvals will be familiar. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to take questions at the end of the next presentation. So thank you very much for your attention, and thank you again to Eric for his support. So now I'm going to be joined by my colleague Bruno Hidalgo Rodriguez, who is a civil aviation specialist for ANAC. Bruno will be joining us in a moment. I don't have a baseball hat for you, Bruno, but I do have the bottle of cachaça that we bought with you when we were in Brasilia, negotiating the ANAC and CAA tip. So Bruno has very kindly agreed to take over this presentation, so I'm going to pass you over to his capable hands. Hola, Bruno.
Okay, hello everyone. Well, my name is Bruno Hidalgo Rodriguez. I am the coordinator for the bilateral agreements on product certification in ANAC. First of all, I would like to thank the Dominic and the CAA colleagues for the opportunity to be here today talking to you about ANAC and a little bit about our new tip. Okay, so our intention today would be to provide you an overview of this new ANAC CAA tip, to clarify some differences, explain actually there is only one difference between the ANAC EASA tip and the ANAC CAA tip, and we're going to go through that, and provide any explanation on subtleties that may arise in this beginning of implementation. Next slide, please. Okay, so we are implementing this tip between ANAC and CAA through a higher level agreement, which is a memorandum of understanding that is, I believe, being signed this week, and in the following couple of weeks we should be publishing the MOU. And the tip comes under the MOU, providing the technical procedures for the validation activities. It is basically the same tip that we have with EASA. Can you go back? Thank you. So it's basically the same tip that we have with EASA, same scope and privileges, and also the application process is the same. I think that is important to highlight here in this slide, the fact that the MOU and the tip, they will recognize the designs issued by EASA to UK persons prior to the end of the transition period of the UK. So all the approvals, all the certificates that may be recognized by the UK, they will be as well recognized by ANAC. So you can go to the next slide, please. Just can skip to the next. So start talking about the ANAC legal and regulatory framework. I'll go back one, I'm sorry. Okay, this one. Just a quick overview about our legal and regulatory framework to understand where the TIP and the MOU are located and where they fit in our legislation. So basically, the Brazilian civil aviation system is governed by two main laws, which are the CBA, the Brazilian Aeronautical Code, and the ANAC law. The CBA mainly builds up the aviation system in Brazil and brings to Brazil the state responsibilities agreed in the Chicago Convention. And the ANAC law establishes ANAC as the civil aviation authority in Brazil. And we are an independent autarky, which means that we are empowered to take all the necessary decisions and measures and issue all the regulations governing the civil aviation system in Brazil independently from the executive government. So this is where the ANAC board of directors they work. They, among other things, they are responsible for issuing the regulations. And underneath the board of directors, we have several technical departments responsible for effectively implement the regulations and oversee the system. And in order to do that, we are able to issue any necessary guidance materials, such as the supplementary instructions and working procedures. And you can see in the right side of the slide where each of the international agreements that we have, where they fit in our legislation. So, for instance, between Brazil and EU, we have a BASA. In fact, we only have two BASAs in Brazil today, one with the EU and another one with the United States. And these are state-level agreements, which mean they have similar status to the laws because they are approved by the Congress and by the President. And as such, they are able to make specific dispositions that may differ from the laws. And that happens in the Brazil-EU BASA. But it does not impact directly our technical implementation procedures for the product certification. A second level agreement that we have is the Memorandum of Understanding. And this is the level of agreement that we are working with UK. We are going to have the MOU between ANAC and CAA. And this, as you can see, is in the same level of our regulations. So it has a similar status to the regulations, and it may provide specific conditions that may differ from the regulations. This in fact happens in regards to the maintenance organizations, but for our tip here for the subject today about the product certification doesn't change anything. It's just for you to know the differences between the agreements between Brazil and EU and Brazil UK. One is the BAS, another one is the MOU. But anyway, both technical implementation procedures are in a procedure level, so they have the same status and the same scope, basically. Next slide, please. And here I would like to make just a quick overview about the ANAC structure, because we have recently suffered a change in our structure. As you can see there, ANAC has several technical departments, but I only put here the two related to this change, the airworthiness department and the flight standards. Until last month, the maintenance organization competencies used to be allocated in the airworthiness department, but ANAC changed that, seeking for more synergy between the maintenance and the operational aspects of certification and oversight. So basically, we have today in the airworthiness department the aircraft register, the continued airworthiness for the aeronautical products, the standards where I work, and the approval for organizations that includes design and production organizations, and also the approval of the design itself. And that's where you are going to have some interface during the validation processes. It's in that branch called GCPP that is responsible for the product design. Later on the presentation, I will show you what are the contacts for the validation processes within that organization. And over there, the air agreements, it's my contact if you have any doubts or you need any information regarding the bilateral agreements. Next slide, please. Okay, so here, this is the website where we have all our bilateral agreements. And so far, this is the same website where you can find both the certification and the maintenance organization agreements. On that right bottom empty space, we should have the UK in a couple months, in a couple weeks. And that's where we'll be able to find the tip and also the MAG. Next. Another one. Okay. So talking about the tip itself, basically the scope and privileges are the same as the ANAC EASA tip. If we are talking about the type certificates, nothing changed. All the initial TCs will require validation and through the same process as we have today with EASA. Next one, please. And about major design changes made by the TC or STC holder, it's the same thing, nothing changed. The design changes should be classified as minor, major level 1 or level 2. Minor and major level 1 will be accepted. Major level 1 require the validation process. So the same thing as we have today with EASA. Next one. Okay, so for major design changes, by the TC holder, nothing changed. All the initial STCs will require validation, and the subsequent changes to the STC will be addressed to the classification of minor, major, and level 1, level 2. Nothing changed to the EASA tip. And this is the only change that we actually have between the ANAC EASA and the ANAC CAA tip. It relates to the minor design changes by other person than the TC or STC holder. And what we have here is actually, we are taking the opportunity that we have with the CAA to clarify the language that we have today in the ANAC EASA tip. And we are going to do that as well in the near future in a revision of the EASA tip. And what is that? Today we have a language that says that for minor changes to the type designed by a person other than the TC or STC holder, the change shall be accepted or approved in accordance with the respective procedures of ANAC and EASA for such change. And once a minor change is approved under the system of either ANAC or EASA, it is considered approved by the other. Okay, so here we have, I wouldn't say it's an inconsistency, but it's more like it allows a misinterpretation when we read this, this paragraph, because it was intended to refer to the aircrafts that are being imported from one state to another, and the minor changes implemented in that aircraft would be accepted. But this allows for misinterpretation regarding the full acceptance of the design. We have some questions about that, and that's why we need to revise, because in fact in the Brazilian system we do not have minor changes for other person than the TC holder. So we have to revise this language in the EASA tip, and we are taking the opportunity to already revise it and clarify the intent of this paragraph in the ANAC CAA tip. That will look like the second paragraph over there, that states that for minor changes to a type designed by a person other than the TC or STC holder, which were already installed in an aeronautical product to be imported to Brazil, the alteration in accordance with those minor changes will be accepted by ANAC for the individual product. And that is the intent of this change is mainly to clarify the application of the paragraph. So this is a difference between the ANAC EASA tip and the ANAC CAA tip, but this is just a momentary difference, because we're going to change the EASA tip as well to fit in the same idea. Next slide, please. So about the repair design approval, nothing changed as well. Everything the same as what we have with EASA. So I think you can skip this slide. TSOs, the same thing. We automatically accept each other TSO products. Nothing changed according to the EASA tip. So please, next slide. For the replacement parts as well, privileges unchanged. So we automatically accept the replacement parts as long as they are not critical parts. ANAC or CAA is the certificating authority for the replacement part, and it's marking accordingly to the CA requirements. Just one note that maybe is worth to highlight is that while the CAA issues STCs for all replacement parts, in ANAC we don't issue STCs for the replacement part. We issue what we call CPAA, that is a certificate for the appliance, and we issue as well a COP, which is a production certificate. Next one. Next. Okay, so about the application process, nothing changed. It's the same process that you have today. You have to go through today under the ANAC EASA tip. I just would like to provide you here some useful links. The first one refers to the supplementary instruction that describes the process for the validation of aeronautical products. The second one is the initial application form, and there you have the contacts for the personnel responsible for the validation procedures in ANAC, Mr. Flavio for the TCs and Mrs. Leticia for STCs. And again, my contact if you need any information regarding the bilateral agreements. Next one. Okay, so here is just an example of the application fees related to the validation processes. These are established by law, and this is something that ANAC must comply with. It's a higher level law, and we don't have so far any openings to discuss fees in the bilateral agreements. So this is basically the fees applicable to everyone. You can go to the next slide. Regarding the changes by the TC holder, there is no fee established for that. So the applicant, for all the validation processes, we do need the proof of payment of the fee prior to starting the application, prior to starting the assessment of the validation. But what we normally do is we accept the application package without the payment of the fee, and we start communication with the applicant to provide all the necessary instructions for the payment of the fee. And once that is concluded and we have the proof of payment, we can start working in the assessment of the process. That's already how it happens with EASA, and continue to be the same process in the ANAC CAA. So I think that was basically it. If you have any questions, I'm here available to provide the answers as necessary. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Bruno, very much for moving swiftly through the arrangements under the tip, and it's really good to see that the arrangements we'll be working under in the UK in the future are very, very similar to the ones that some of our colleagues will be familiar with under the EASA arrangements. So we've caught up quite well on time, so we've got a good period of time now to go through questions and answers. I'm going to hand over to Liam, who will lead the questions, and all my colleagues will join us now to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. Yeah, lots of questions come in, so thank you very much for those. I'll just ask them in order from the bottom. So one probably for Mark, it's more on general validation. So can the DOA make the judgment as a validation acceptance, or do we still need to make the application for CAA to make the judgment?
Okay, thanks, Clive. Yeah, the application form, the SRG 1726 NR, which is online, by the way, to answer another question, does request the applicant to make a first determination as to whether it's eligible for streamline or whether it's required full technical validation. But the CAA procedures and our validating partners procedures will do a check to ensure that it's going to go down the correct stream. And in fact, part of the charter between FAA and CAA is that we use a common classification record to make sure that we are absolutely doing that in a consistent manner.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, next one probably for Dominic. Will the UK CAA accept EASA and FAA approved test houses for UK DOA designs?
Is that from, I'm not sure who that's from, but will we accept test houses? I don't think there's going to be any difference between the existing arrangements that EASA has. We used to approve test houses back in the day. I don't think there's an intention that we're going to return to that at this time. So I think the answer to that would be yes.
Thanks, Dominic. Okay, so maybe one for Mark or Mazdak. So
oh, sorry, Liam, I think you might have muted yourself.
Oh, unintentional. Apologies.
Yep, you're back with us now.
Apologies for that. Okay, so this one's probably for Mark or Mazdak. What is the rationale for not accepting FAA-issued AMOCs, where the FAA is the type certifying authority, and is there a plan to harmonise this in the near future?
Mazdak, I might need your help here. I'm not quite sure about the rationale. I mean, that tip has been developed based on an existing template that FAA uses with many other NAAs, and it's been developed over the last couple of years. I'm not sure I can remember the reason behind it, Mazdak.
Of course, yeah, I don't know the rationale behind it either, but I know in the scope of, as we conduct our technical assessments at the beginning of next year and build a tighter relationship with UKCA, those elements will be addressed. So I can assure you of that. So it will not be something that will be consistent long term.
Thanks, Mazdak.
Thank you.
Of course.
A question here, I'm going to paraphrase slightly, is for Mark. I think it's more around DOA approval. So it's talking about organisations that may have a UK DOA approval and also effectively a sister company approval in an EU member state. The question is, in the future, will the CAA accept a common handbook covering both DOAs?
Well, the procedures are going to be 99.9% common. So yeah, I would think a common handbook would be a pragmatic way forward, as long as there is absolute clarity in the approval route of whichever design you're trying to approve, whether it's going to be EASA or UK.
Thank you, Mark. Another one, I think, for Mazdak. When will the FAA TCs and associated validation projects transfer from the Seattle ACO to the new international validation branch?
So that office is in the process of getting established. So as the resources are pulled into it, we anticipate it to be fully functional by mid next year. That might shift right or left, but I think at that time, those projects that may be with a particular ACO will transition over to that validation office.
Thank you, Mazdak. One more for you, I believe. So will the FAA recognize FAA validated UK CAA STCs for PMA to assist the US manufacturer of parts and equipment?
So I believe, yes, we will. I think the second special arrangement that Mark had covered really well. Anything up to this point that's been issued under YASA and going forward for the next 2 years will be recognized, absolutely.
Great, thank you. Let's have a look through. So the further question, which was raised specifically for Dominic, but maybe broader as well. Will the UKCA, like the FAA and EASA, participate in SAE committee meetings, workshops, etc., to develop aerospace standards and aerospace recommended practices?
I think we very much would like to do so. I think that's actually a question that I'm going to hand back to Liam as our manager, because obviously it will be resource dependent. But yes, we very much want to have a seat at the table as is considered appropriate for what we want to do with you guys.
Yeah, good point, Dominic. So I think, you know, there's an acceptance that there's some real value in those types of activities. So we need to make resource available in the most appropriate way. So I think that's a positive there. Okay. So there's a couple that are along a similar theme, which I think have probably been covered, but I'll raise anyway. So either for Mark or Mazdak, so or probably for Mark, if we have an FAA STC in process now, can CAA validation for the STC be applied for prior to the 31st of December?
It would be subject to reminding myself what's in that special arrangement, Liam, to be honest with you. I can't remember the exact text, but I would refer the questioner to that special arrangement, which details those circumstances.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
Well, technically speaking, we don't actually have the power yet to start producing validation certificates, because that's a competency that is with the EASA until the end of the year.
Agree. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Chris. Okay. This is around validation. Mark, maybe one for you again. So will current technical validations that are being conducted by EASA and may roll into 21 be taken over by the UKCAA, or will a separate application for the UKCAA validation be required?
Again, back to the vagaries of that special arrangement that's referenced from section 9 of the IPA. Liam.
Okay, thank you.
I think maybe if I could just come in on the back of Mark there briefly, I think that's very much how it would go if we were validating something that came from the US. But if this is an application that's been made to EASA for certification in the first place and then coming to us, then is still subject to those negotiations, and we hope that we'll be able to effect a smooth handover with little or no repetition of activities that you may have already completed.
Thank you, Neil. Maybe one for you here or for Mark. Is there any specific part marking requirements like PMA and EPA for parts approved under the CAA STC?
EPA, European Parts Approval, part marking requirement for parts manufactured from data other than the TC holder or UKT or the TSO approval holder. I'm going to ask my colleague Chris to confirm that the statutory instrument that transcribes Part 21 as is in the EU state into the UK state actually makes that translation from EPA into UK PAA. I would expect the same thing to apply.
I would expect so, but I would need to check that one. I can't remember off the top of my head.
Okay, thanks. Like any of these, if we don't quite capture the answer that you're looking for, please do send the questions into that email address that you saw at the start and was part of the invitation, and we'll answer where we can. Okay, one for around FAA, Mazdak or Mark. For an FAA AMOC issued for a repair, will the UK operator be responsible for applying for a CAA AMOC, and what is the process for this?
AMOC for a repair. Go, Mazdak.
No, I was just gonna defer to you, Mark. Sorry.
Okay. Yes, apply to the CAA UK for the approval of the AMOC. The AMOCs aren't read across, and if it's a UK operator wishing to have an AMOC for a UK requirement, then yes, they would need to make application to the UK CAA. Is the simple answer. Yeah, if I've missed the point, please clarify.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there, Mark. I think also the kind of AMOCs that are associated with repairs nearly always, because the repair is in an AD affected area, and they're often quite specific to the particular aircraft. So the process you just described is exactly the right one. Thank you.
Thanks, Neil.
Neil, one that's specifically for yourself. Will the UK UAS CS be aligned with the EASA special condition for light unmanned aircraft systems?
Oh, that's a tough one. I have to say our colleagues in the UAS team are looking very carefully at EASA's certification specifications for UAS. And there are a few areas where they perhaps consider what EASA is proposing maybe a bit tougher than is what required, particularly some of the boundaries between specific and certified category. So all I can say is please watch this space. They will obviously have some new powers at the end of the year with the various unmanned aircraft regulations coming into effect just as we leave the EU. So they're preparing their specifications at the moment. So if you have any further questions on that, drop us a line on that email that we've put back up on the screen at some point before the end of the meeting, and I can put you in contact with the policy lead in the UAS team who's dealing with that.
Thank you, Neil. Dave Mailer, I think this one is for you. There's a couple of questions here, but I'll read one. They're on a similar theme, but it's regarding the scheme of charges, and it's talking about the annual approval and surveillance fees based on being an uplift of the current EASA fee. And it's asking what the rationale reasoning is behind the increasing costs.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, no, this was a topic that we expected to be brought up and one that dates back to when we were standing up this capability and getting approval for the cost of this capability. As with all CAA charges, we have to cover our costs, and standing up a new capability of 21 FT doesn't come at zero cost, as you can imagine. So the work that was done was that this had to be self-funded by industry, and hence the rate that was communicated in the scheme of charges and through the consultation period. So that still stands. You know, it is less than desirable, but unfortunately, especially with COVID, but it was something that we had to do. We had to cover our costs. Just so you're aware that we've also been working on, there's been no charges levied at the moment. We can't levy our charges until we actually stand up or issue the approval. So there'll be no charges levied until the 1st of January 2021, and then further charges will be levied after that. So we know that this is an area that is open to challenge, but ultimately the context is it had to be funded by industry, and the costs had to be covered by the number of projected approvals. So that's where we are. That does not mean to say that that's the way it will always be. And through our scheme of charges consultation, it is something that we will look at as we go forward. But that is the unfortunate price, should I say, we had to pay for standing up this capability.
Thank you, Dave. I've got one here for Mark. Regarding Mark's comments on the automatic transfer of UK DOAs, existing EASA STCs to the CA on the 1st of January, will the DOA's back catalogue of changes or STCs then be both applicable to EASA aircraft and UK aircraft until such a time that a change is made?
Yes, I think we said that there's recognition of designs that are extant by year end, and they would continue to be extant. They're effectively grandfathered, and if there are any design changes to them, then they're subject to UK certification and whatever may happen between the arrangement between the EU and UK once that's resolved.
Thanks, Mark. A second part to that question, which I've just seen, which is what if the DOA wants or wishes to keep the STCs in the EASA system? Does the organisation have to request the CA not to transfer them?
No, I'm assuming here, Dominic, that if the STC is within the EASA system, they're not strictly transferred. That they can remain where they are.
I would agree with you, Mark. I'm not sure if Neil is able to add a piece to this, because again, is it something that's still to be negotiated in terms of our arrangements?
Yeah, we might have to think about that, because I think we have a state of design responsibility in ICAO, and how we allocate, therefore, between EASA and ourselves is something we should take away and think about, and it may well be in part of negotiations.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Yeah, I think this is an area where the only way we can bring proper clarity to it is to conclude an agreement with EASA, and in that agreement, make sure that there are the proper statements about the validity of various approvals, which in some ways would actually supersede the things that we've put in our EU Withdrawal Act. Because they have been prepared, if you like, from a UK only point of view, to ensure that there's clarity about what's valid in the UK on the 1st of December, so 1st of January rather. So all we can say is, as soon as we have information that we can share that is absolutely crystal clear on this, we will.
Thank you, Neil. So question on validation. Will there be any visibility of the status of CAA STC validation applications to the validating authority? Mark, is that one?
I don't quite understand the question. I've been looking at that a few times now. I'm just wondering if Mohammed could actually just resubmit that with a bit of clarity. Because you're talking about validating twice.
I took that to mean about the visibility of the status, so how it's going, what stage of the process we're at. But happy to leave that one and come back to it if it comes back in.
Well, the streamlined ones are subject to a timeline that's agreed within the IPA and the TIP, for example, and the other ones that require technical validation will. But both parties will be subject to that process, so that there will be inherent visibility in both parties.
Yeah. Thank you, Mark. Mark, another one possibly for you. So related to bilaterals. So it's for an organisation that only has an ADOA. The question is, must the organisation apply? Must the organisation have a full Part 21J approval for these to apply?
The answer, he says, with 99% confidence, is no. Okay, you don't need the full DOA to make that application for validation, because as we discussed before, ADOA applicants are eligible for certain STCs and certain TCs even, and that, from what I see, they're not excluded. But I'll take that and provide a definitive response when I have an opportunity to read the text in more detail.
It's me again, Liam. Just to quickly go back to the previous question. If we're talking here about the progress of a validation by these with the certifying authority, so in other words, a UK DOA has applied through the CAA for validation by either TCCA, FAA or ANAC. How does the CAA know how that is progressing? Well, in normal ways of working together, we are regular dialogue with our counterparts. I know sometimes when it's been through the EASA process, sometimes there's a lack of communication for whatever reason, but let's hope that we will have good communications between ourselves and our partners so that we understand and know where the process has got to, or the validation has got to, and vice versa from them to us.
Thanks, Dominic. Okay, one on approvals. If an organisation holds a UK Part 21J approval alongside a third country EASA Part 21J approval, and the scope and privileges are identical, will one independent system monitoring surveillance audit be acceptable to cover the ISM function, or will two separate surveillance audits be required?
I think this is one that's similar to the POA side, isn't it? Maybe Neil can speak to it, because I think there's still something that's ongoing, isn't it, in terms of arrangements. I think the POA, it's completely separate approvals, separate surveillances. It'd be nice to actually combine them together, of course, wouldn't it?
Yeah, so with respect to EASA issued design organisation approvals, we're in the realms of what is in our bilateral arrangement. However, we have to reflect on the purpose of a bilateral arrangement the intention is to reduce the duplicative effort, and where possible to eliminate having duplicated approvals. So the theory would be, if you conclude a satisfactory arrangement, there wouldn't necessarily be a need to hold an EASA DOA in order to gain access to EU markets. There may be some business reasons that you might wish to hold an EASA DOA, but from a conceptual point of view, there shouldn't need to be that duplication of approval, which I think is rather what Dominic's referring to around production organisations. So if you look at the arrangements we've concluded with all our bilateral partners taking part today, we've concluded that production approvals are acceptable in each other's systems, and we don't require duplicated approval or the organisations to issue different certificates in order to be able to sell their parts in the other market or provide them to the manufacturers in those markets, or even the operators who of course buy new parts as well as maintained items. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. At this point, any of my colleagues wish to pick up any specific questions? I'm still scanning through. If there are any there that you can answer, then please shout.
I noticed the one from Peter Gord that's talking about whether UK DOAs will be effectively funding the confidence building elements of a validation, or will there be a subsidy? In the piece that Mark and Mazdak gave, there wasn't an explanation of the FAA fees. So Mazdak, are you going to charge a fortune to build confidence in us, or will it be free of charge?
Free of charge. Only if the Giants keep on winning.
Thank you very much. Well, Peter will be pleased, and I'm sure others as well. Thank you.
Liam, before you jump into the next one, I noticed there's a few hands up from the participants. I don't know if that's because they wanted to say something, but might be an opportunity to see if we can do this. Tim Moore, if you're still there, is there something you wanted to say? Or is it a legacy hand from an earlier thought? I'm not sure if we can bring you in here. I'm going to defer to Danila, who's working away in the background, busily trying to coordinate all the audio and visuals.
Neil, can you hear me now?
Yeah, absolutely crystal clear, Tim. Please go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to find the unmute button. No, it was an inadvertent hand up.
Okay, thank you. Alan McGowan.
Any questions I've had have been amply answered, actually. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. I'll just try and clear these down and then hand back to Liam for a few more questions before Dave wraps up. Alan McGowan.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yeah, absolutely fine. Please go ahead.
Perfect. My questions are about EASA STCs that are going to be issued in January, February, March next year. How can we get those accepted into the UK system? Is there going to be a 2-year grace period?
Okay, thank you for that question. So it's the answer you probably least want. Is it really depends on the outcome of our negotiations with the EU. All I can say is there are proposals on both sides to have a certain level of acceptance, but we can't really pinpoint exactly where that barrier will be as yet because it's still subject to those negotiations. If for some reason we end the year and there is no deal in place, then the CAA will have to make its position clear about what we will accept from the EASA system and what will require validation in our system. So I'm sorry I can't give you the clear answer, but I'm hoping that EU negotiations will move on swiftly in the next few days, and that we would have something more positive to say about this in the next couple of weeks.
Thank you, Neil.
Okay, and just the last hand, David Lunn. Okay. David. Okay, I think we may have lost David. Perhaps I'll hand back to Liam, and if David still has a question, please put your hand up again and we'll try and come back to you before the end.
Thank you, Neil. There's another one here about when the SRG 1726 form will be available. I think you've answered that one, Mark. There's another one along the lines saying that it mentions validation and acceptance. Is this correct?
If it does mention acceptance, we know from this afternoon that there's no application required for acceptance. So if acceptance is in there, I'll review and get it corrected. So it shouldn't be in there.
Okay, thank you, Mark. There's a question here which I'm happy to take, which asks, it's just from Anonymous. It says, observing that design and certification and validation related questions have solely been answered by Mark and Dominic today, should the industry be concerned that if Mark or Dominic are unavailable in the new year, do we have enough capacity and resource, etc., to deliver that? Obviously, Dominic and Mark are the two key people in the team, and they are obviously here on the presentation today. It isn't just Mark and Dominic, though, I have to assure you. There is a team that sits behind them, and clearly we are doing various elements of knowledge transfer, skills, etc. And there's also a lot of people there that have done this stuff before. So it isn't just Dominic and Mark, although they will remain a key part of the team.
Well, we do regularly buy our lottery tickets, Liam. So just so you know.
Thank you, Dominic. Okay, so another question here. When will the revised IPA be published? Mark, is that one that yourself or Mazdak can?
I guess it's in the hands of Chris and Neil, actually.
Yeah, I was going to say it's probably something as soon as we have it signed and we have copies that are signed, we will put it up on our website, and I think the FAA will do the same, unless I'm wrong, Mazdak.
No, that's correct. We have signed documents, and they're actually being FedExed over, all 3 documents. So for the actual ceremonial wet signature.
Yep, so that's all underway as we speak. So should be available on the website in the next week, really, by the time we've signed, returned, and agreed to post. So they'll be there. And they're really not very much different from what's already on our CA website on the IPA we concluded about 18 months ago now.
Okay. Again, if anybody sees any, please jump in. There's a lot along similar themes that I believe we've answered, so apologies for.
So there is one from Anonymous. Are there any discussion going on with FOCA with references to the bilateral agreement? The answer is yes, but they are very much waiting for behind what will happen with the EU arrangement. So as soon as we have something with the EU, we will be making arrangements with other EEA states / Switzerland and so on.
Okay, thank you. Any more? Any others that we haven't covered, guys, that we need to pick up?
Yeah, I can see there's a question here from George Williams about the validity of EASA test pilots ratings on people's licenses. I think that's a good point you raised there. I'll take that one away and talk to my licensing colleagues. There is a validation process, a straightforward process that's been established for pilots' licenses, where if they hold the EASA license, they can continue to fly aircraft on the UK register for up to 2 years. But there is a validation document that they'll be able to download from the website. But there may be some more to it when we look at the situation with regards to TP. So that's something that I'll talk to my colleague and get back to you on. It should be straightforward because a test pilot rating is in many ways, from a technical point of view, just a rating on a license. So I wouldn't expect that should introduce some new challenges for you if you're using a TP who doesn't have a UK license, or TPs who don't have UK licenses.
Okay.
Back to you, Liam.
Thank you. I'm still scrolling. There's quite a few earlier questions. I'm just seeing whether there's ones that we haven't covered along a similar theme. No, I'm struggling, to be honest.
Okay, well, I think we're getting very close to the end of our session. So I think what I will say is, well, thank you for everybody who's taken part and answered questions. Thank you all for our colleagues from overseas who've taken part in this meeting. We tried to time it so that it wasn't a too awful a time of day for you all. And now I'm going to hand over to Dave Malins, who will close the meeting. But for me, it's been a pleasure to take part in this afternoon, and we've seen some great questions, and we will continue to try and provide some answers in the coming days. Thank you all.
Thank you.
And thank you, Neil, thank you, Liam, and thank you to the broader CAA team and our colleagues, obviously in our bilateral partners. So Mazdak, Bruno, Eric, much appreciated for your time and your inputs for this afternoon. Very valuable. Thank you very much. I think a couple of points for me. We've spent a considerable amount of time on making sure that we are as ready as a safety regulator as we can be. And I hope this afternoon has aided industry to be in a position that they are also as prepared as they can be. I think I want to pick up on the point that was raised, about resilience, because it is really important to me and to us as a safety regulator. We recognise that this is, been a considerable challenge for the CAA. Since 2003, we haven't necessarily had this capability. We've certainly supported our colleagues in EASA, but we recognise re-establishing this capability is no mean feat, and we've done a huge amount of work, but we're not saying that this is the perfectly formed team, and we recognise the challenges that this brings. And I know that in Liam and the team that Liam is establishing and we've established together, we will get there. We will have this resilience, and I hope that our bilateral partners will put challenge to that, I'm sure, over the coming months and years. But I sincerely believe that we will re-establish ourselves as a respected regulator, and we will grow and build on the foundations that we've put in place. So I think they're good challenges, but I know that I have every confidence that we will work together and make sure this team is stronger going forward. I'm going to wrap up there. I think, again, thank you to all the presenters, but again, thank you to the participants. 300 participants at its peak is no mean feat. I hope it's been useful for you. As we say, there are opportunities for us to come around and answer any further questions. And by all means, please email any further questions that you may have that we've not clarified to the email address that you can see on your screens now. So thank you very much, and I wish you all a good afternoon and good evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well.